Hi, I'm Andrew McDonald from talkingesl.com. I just wanted to introduce this video personally. It's going to be a PowerPoint presentation really, but this video is going to be about task-based learning and its implication for the communicative classroom. So we're going to look at things like, well, what is task-based learning? Where can we get materials? And what is a communicative classroom? And do you teach communicatively? So I hope you enjoy the video and please watch this space. Thank you. Hello, I'm Andrew McDonald from Talking ESL, and today I'd like to present to you the first video in a short series about task-based learning and the communicative classroom. So to begin, well, what is task-based learning? Let's look at some methodology. Let's begin with the methodological basis. So these days, students really want to be able to communicate in class, and this takes us into an area of research called communicative competence. And this refers to the learner's ability to use language to communicate successfully, which is obviously the goal of any communicative classroom. So a little bit of theory, but Canal and Swain in 1980 defined this communicative competence, or composing it, in four distinct areas. You've got the words and the rules, the appropriacy, so how appropriate the language is, the cohesion and coherence, so how well things are structured when the students are communicating, and the use of communication strategies. This I'll delve deeper into in a future video which I've planned for shortly. But the methodology here can often leave teachers with a problem. One problem could be where to find resources for a truly communicative classroom. Another question teachers frequently ask me is, well, what is task-based learning? What's all the fuss about? So let's take a look. So these days in the classroom, very common to find a textbook as the main teaching resource. And regardless of which textbook you're using, there are some common activities which these books use, such as working in pairs. Also, there are often a number of well-structured exercises aimed at consolidating knowledge of grammar or knowledge of vocabulary. But there's not much emphasis on tasks. So let's look at these exercises and activities and what they mean for the communicative classroom. Well, exercise is basically a focused practice. They're used to manipulate vocabulary and grammar in a very controlled way, such as look for the synonym of this word in a text, or filling in the blanks, or multiple choice. These are not communicative at all. Activities, well, they're events which get learners involved in expression and interpretation of meaning. We can put people in pairs to answer questions, for example, and the interpretation of meaning might come in as, sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you repeat that again, please? So really, they're quite structured. They've not got freedom of thought, freedom of expression. They're quite controlled. So really, for this, they're only partially communicative, but they are useful as a stepping stone to task completion. Now, tasks, on the other hand, are very similar to activities in that they involve the expression and interpretation of meaning, but there the similarity ends, because tasks also have a purpose which is not language related. In task-based learning, learners use the language to learn something about each other or the world around them. Tasks are fully communicative in nature. Also, tasks have a defined, measurable result. For example, if the task involves making a YouTube video, then at the end of the task, each team should have a video to show the group. It doesn't necessarily have to be uploaded, but it should be a video in the format of a typical YouTube video. Also, tasks are opportunities for students to concentrate on meaning-focused language use. So it's the opportunity to communicate using meaning. Tasks don't involve activities to practice a new grammar point in pairs. They do not involve extensive writing to display mastery of a specific grammar or vocabulary point. Whereas exercises and activities are primarily focused on form, that's to say the grammar or the vocabulary of the day, and the aim is to practice a component which has been presented in the class. So exercises and activities essentially are based on the traditional present, practice and produce, or PPP, model. Tasks are far more open. Students can make use of any language which they've learned or acquired during a task. It's not restricted to the form of the day or the PPP model. And the difference between learning and acquisition also is quite distinct. And at the next video I have planned, we'll tackle this topic in more detail. To finish this part, Vanden Branden writes in a book, and I'll post links to the title of this book below, that task-based syllabuses do not chop up language into small pieces. They take an holistic, functional, and communicative approach. Tasks, rather than any specific linguistic item, are the basic unit for the design of this educational activity, communicative teaching. So what's in a task? Well, there are 4 things that a task really ought to include. First of all, we've got the use of language, because there's a primary focus on meaning. So students should create and understand communicative messages. There's a lot of communication happens during task-based learning. There should be a gap. Number 2, typically the task should involve some kind of gap. It could be an information gap where one student has information the other one does not have. It could be an opinion gap where students have differing opinions, have to reach an agreement about a topic, and so on. There's some kind of gap in information or opinion. Number 3, learners can use their own resources. They're free to use their own linguistic resources, but they can also use non-linguistic resources such as facial expressions, body language, and posture. In traditional activities, learners are given the language to use. In tasks, they are not required to manipulate presented language. And then the outcome, which I mentioned with the YouTube video. So the language is used as a means to achieve a communicative outcome. It's not simply a display of language. So the question I have here, do you teach communicatively? Most teachers say they do. So on the left I have some examples for you to think about. Number 1, is communication not teaching grammar in the traditional way? Or number 2, is communication getting students to talk about a topic in pairs? Or number 3, is communication practicing grammatical items using group speaking activities? So I think given the previous information I've just talked about, you should be able to answer those questions quite clearly. Now on the right I have, in order to teach communicatively, you need to define communicative, which is something that a lot of people can't do. And the argument I have is, how can you say what is communicative and appropriate for your classroom without understanding what the term communicative means? So if you like, you could pause the video now and write down your definition of communication. So the definition of communication that's currently accepted in language acquisition and teaching circles dates back to the 1970s from Sandra J. Savignon. And the definition of communication is the expression, interpretation, and sometimes negotiation of meaning in a given context. What's more, communication is also purposeful. So let's break this down, because it's quite a big statement. So let's break it down and see what it means. So first of all, let's look at meaning. So meaning refers to the information contained in some kind of message. It can also refer to a speaker's intent. There can be overt or literal meaning, sometimes hidden meaning, which involves reading between the lines. For example, I could say, it's 4 o'clock. You might think, okay, it's 4 o'clock. That means let's have a cup of coffee. Or I could say, it's 4 o'clock. I think, oh my, it's 4 o'clock. I'm going to be late for my next meeting. So the meaning, the intent is different, even though I'm using the same sentence. Expression. This can be oral, it could be signing, body language, facial expression, or even a dog wagging its tail where it's happy to see you is a form of expression. Interpretation. So communication is not one-sided. Expression of meaning is communicative only if someone else is expecting you or expecting to understand you. For example, you don't say hi, good morning to an empty room, nor does a dog wag its tail to itself. So the interpretation is based on how communication is two-sided generally. Negotiation. Well, the negotiation of meaning is not always successful, or you might say something and somebody doesn't quite understand it, therefore there's a requirement for negotiation of meaning. A phrase as simple as, well, what does that mean? Because of an inability to grasp what's being said, kickstarts the negotiation of meaning process. We need to talk about context too. This refers to two principal aspects of communication: the setting and the participants. So role play, for example, where one student is a waiter, the other one is a customer in a restaurant. Well, that's not really recommendable because the context they're in is a classroom. They're not in a restaurant. So the context has to be the classroom, not some fictional area outside. And then there's the purpose for communication. So people always speak, read, write, or listen for a purpose. With write, it could be something like writing a newspaper article or writing a diary as a kind of internal monologue or for somebody to read in the future. But if you're moving your lips and sound is coming out, it doesn't necessarily mean you're communicating. So the purpose of communication is important too. So implicit or explicit teaching, as I've mentioned, we've got a forthcoming video on this very topic, which in the next video will discuss the benefits of implicit teaching and look at explicit teaching. Also, we'll look at mental representation and how our teaching styles might be impacted, because this really follows on from the task-based learning approach. So task-based learning, teacher resources. Well, the good news is we're about to release a set of books or series of books on task-based learning activities for the classroom. And these will be aimed at levels A2, B1, B1+, B2 and C1 of the Common European Reference Framework. In each book there will be 12 real-life tasks for each level. And the tasks, as I've described, will obviously have clear structures. There'll be the preparation, the task and the evaluations. And these tasks are designed for an holistic approach, but they're also suitable for supplementary material and exam preparation classes, simply because students need to be confident speakers in their exams. So watch this space. We'll also be releasing another video about how these books work and what it means for teachers. And at the moment, these books will be available on Amazon Kindle or a PDF download format, not as a physical print edition, simply to keep the cost down. So at that point, thank you very much and speak to you soon.